Hi Sparks, it's Miss Gretchen, and I'm coming at you today with a story from Genesis about a hero of faith in the Bible. Can you think of any heroes that you have in your life? Maybe there's somebody that you look up to, like your mom or your dad, or somebody you know from church or school. Maybe you have a teacher that you really respect and look up to. Well, sometimes we call those people our heroes, and in the Bible there are lots of stories of heroes of faith. Heroes of faith are people who have trusted God and obeyed God, and as a result, they've seen God's faithfulness through their whole lives. So today we're going to look at the story of Abraham. And a while ago, we looked at God's faithfulness to Abraham in giving him his son Isaac, and we know that he was 100 years old when that happened. Well, that was the result of a lifetime of faith, because Abraham is a hero of faith in the Bible. He's a man who seeks God and obeys God, and as a result, God does wonderful things in and through his life. So we're picking up in Genesis chapter 13 if you want to read along in your Bible, or you can just listen to the story today. So Genesis chapter 13 says, So Abram, and before he became Abraham, his name was Abram. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife. What was his wife's name again? Do you remember? That's right, it was Sarah. And if you think back to before she became Sarah, she actually was Sarai. So at this time, our story is Abram and Sarai. And later they're going to become Abraham and Sarah. So we've got Abram, who went up from Egypt, he and his wife, and all that he had, and Lot with him into the Negeb. And Lot is his nephew, so he's related to Abram. Now Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver and in gold, and he journeyed on from the Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first, and there Abram called upon the name of the Lord. Here's the first time in this story where we see Abram's faithfulness. He calls on the name of the Lord. So that means that he's bringing his cares before God, he's worshiping God, and he's showing that he loves and respects and honors God with all that he has. And Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together, and there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites were dwelling in the land. So strife between them means that they're not getting along and maybe even fighting. We know that that there's not really space for both of them. If you've ever shared a room with your sibling, or if you've tried to do something at school and found that somebody was already using maybe the toy you wanted or the slide you were about to play on, and you got frustrated because of that. That's what we're talking about here. There's strife between their herdsmen, and there's not room enough for all of them. So this is a problem, and Lot and Abram are trying to figure out what to do about it. Then Abram said to Lot, Let there be no strife between you and me. So he's saying, I don't want to fight with you. I don't want to disagree with you. How can we figure this out so that we can both live peacefully and get along? Let there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, so the people taking care of the animals. For we are kinsmen, we're related. You're my nephew, I'm your uncle. How can we get along? Is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right, or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere. That means there are rivers flowing through it. It will be great for their crops. It will be great for their livestock. There'll be lots of grass for them to eat. And it'll be a great place for them to settle and have food and all the resources that they need. So he saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. Wow, must have been a really beautiful land, because we know that the garden of the Lord was pretty amazing. Like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt in the direction of Zoar. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. So Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settled among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Now the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. This is going to become a problem later for Lot, because he's settling in an area where there are wicked men. He doesn't know that at first because it looks really green and beautiful, but we know that not everything that looks green and beautiful is actually beautiful. Sometimes deep down there are flaws, and in this case, Lot chose land that had evil men living in it. So he didn't know that at the time, but it becomes a problem later. The Lord said to Abram, after Lot had separated from him, so they went their separate ways, and now we see that God is still talking to Abram. He's still meeting with him, and Abram is still faithful. The Lord, again speaking to Abram, lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give to you and to your offspring forever. And Abram doesn't have any children at this point, so he's believing that God is going to give this land to his descendants, even though he doesn't have any descendants. He doesn't actually have any children yet. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, so that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted. So if you count every bit of dust on the earth, that's how many children God promised to give Abram. So children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren and descendants forever. Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you. So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron, and there he built an altar to the Lord. So we see that one of the first things Abram does in this story is build an altar to the Lord and worship God and seek God. And then there's problems with his nephew Lot, and so he separates from him so that they're no longer fighting. He wants to live at peace with him. And then we see that God speaks to him again and says, hey, I'm going to give you this land. So because Abram is faithful, he hears from God often. And then after he hears from God, he goes and walks through the land. And the last thing we see is that he builds an altar to the Lord. He doesn't start by building himself a great house. He starts by building an altar to the Lord. So we see that Abram, through and through, time after time, is a man who trusts God and honors God. And we see that in the things that he says, in the way that he treats his nephew Lot, and in the things that he does. In his building an altar to the Lord, in his praying to the Lord or worshiping the Lord, he pauses and takes time to do that every time. So how about you? Have you taken time to pause and worship the Lord, to read the Bible, to thank the Lord for what you have today, to thank the Lord even for the sunshine and this heat that we're experiencing? Have you thanked the Lord for your family? Have you built an altar to the Lord? I wonder what that could look like nowadays. But pausing, giving thanks to the Lord, and listening to what the Lord has to say to us. How is he telling us to live? And how is he directing our steps? He was really clear with Abram, and sometimes it's harder for us to discern what exactly he wants us to do, but he is still speaking to us. So I hope that you're able to hear from God, maybe through this lesson today, or maybe in your devotions or time at church. But God desires a relationship with you and wants to speak to you. So enjoy the lesson today, and God bless.